Hello there. Today we're going to ask, did God have a wife? Was there a Mrs. God? Well, you wouldn't think so if you've ever read the Bible, but in this video we're going to look at a few pieces of archaeological evidence discovering items and rituals not discussed in the Bible that may suggest otherwise. And then we shall ask, if God did have a wife, then what happened to her? So, welcome to the story of Mrs. God, and welcome to Creckenfold. So our story will start in 1967 in a cave in Gibbert el-Qom, a cave which had been used as a tomb in the middle of the 8th century BCE. And when examined by archaeologists, a hand carving was found on the wall of this cave, and above this hand carving there were some incisions in the stone which on closer inspection turned out to be an inscription, an incredibly difficult to read and somewhat ambiguous inscription, but it can be translated as saying, "Blessed be Yurihahu by Yahweh, and from his enemies by his Asherah he has saved him." Now, this is an interesting inscription as it shows Yahweh being with something called Asherah. Now, Asherah with a lowercase a is a pole or a staff used by cultists as a focus of worship. But Asherah with a capital A is the name of a goddess, normally associated as the wife or consort of the Canaanite god El, and she had a role of a fertility goddess or a mother goddess. So, what is a Canaanite goddess doing being mentioned with Yahweh? Well, the land of Canaan was the region that the Israelites would eventually take over as part of their promised land. And if you're interested in how that happened and how they took it over, then I'll link you to my Heaven and Hell video above, as that tells the story of how that happened and didn't happen and happened again and didn't happen, etc. And also, if you like the videos I'm making, then please hit the like and subscribe button. It means a lot to me, and it means more people like yourselves will watch these videos, and that will help me more. So thank you very much. Anyway, back to the cave and this tomb where we have this inscription that is a bit ambiguous, referring to Asherah as belonging to Yahweh. So was this Asherah the goddess Asherah or the staff Asherah in being Yahweh's? And does that make Asherah, if it was Yahweh's, his wife or consort? And if it does, it puts a question mark over the monotheistic religion of the Israelites, the religion that went into become Judaism and evolved into Christianity and Islam. They only have one God, and they certainly don't have room for another, and especially not a goddess at that, as it is a very male-focused religion. Well, the story I'm telling continues in 1975 in excavations at Kuntilit Azurad, which is in the Sinai Peninsula. And there within a two-roomed building, 2 storage jars were found, pithoi, and they were really large and dated to about the mid-8th century BCE. And on them there were some pictures and hand carvings. And this was a mishmash of art and writing, and that has been translated on both jars, one saying Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, and on the other jar it says Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah. Now, these jars have caused a little controversy, as there's a picture on one of them, which I'll show, that has been suggested as showing Yahweh presenting his genitals. However, the picture shown has often been altered, and it actually should look like this, which shows both male characters showing their genitalia, which isn't really any better than just one. However, not showing the correct image tries to force the Yahweh and Asherah image by less scrupulous scholars, but this isn't correct, and it is now known that the picture is actually a reference to the Egyptian god Bes. And Bes is a collective name for a group of dwarven deities from Egypt. So be careful if you're going to look up these pictures later to study. Now, it's also believed that the image you see on the jars was drawn after the inscription was written, and so the image and writing may be completely unrelated, which is likely considering the perceived topics of each. The inscriptions themselves are like the tomb inscription, ambiguous again, suffering the same problem of identifying who Asherah is. Is it the cultist pole, or is it the Canaanite goddess? So to help us understand this, to find out if there is a Mrs. God, we shall wind the clock back 10 or so years previous, from 1975 to about 1963, and another excavation, and this time is at a fortress at Tel Alad, and this is just south of Jerusalem and was part of Judea, the 9th to 6th century BCE, just before Nebuchadnezzar came along from Babylon to conquer the region. Now, within the western corner of this fortress, archaeologists have found the remains of a Judean temple, known as the House of Yahweh, the only such place ever found which has this name applied to it. And the temple itself looks similar design to King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and that's the temple which would eventually become the central place of Jewish religion. But this discovered temple was in use between the 9th century BCE and the late 8th century BC, which aligns to the time King Solomon's temple was in use. And this means that it was of a standard tripart design. So these temples had an inner courtyard where sacrifices were made, the main temple, and something called the Holy of Holies. And this is a chamber reserved for the presence of God. It is the most sacred of places, and it represents a place where the chief priest would go to speak to God during very specific ceremonies, like ceremonies of atonement. However, what makes this temple incredibly special and relevant is that within the Holy of Holies here, there are 2 standing stones, one large, one small, and 2 incense stones. And this is interesting because a standing stone represents the presence of a god. And so to have 2 standing stones would represent the presence of 2 gods. And there's one larger standing stone and one smaller standing stone represent a male and female god. And if the smaller one is a female god, is that Asherah? Either way, 2 gods in the monotheistic Israelite religion, again, still doesn't make sense, unless the religion was worshipping 2 gods. And if it was, why was that? And who was that second god, and what happened to them? Well, before we answer that, we need to go back even further, and this time to the discovery of an ancient city in 1849 called Tel Dan in northern Israel. And within the walls of the ruins, they have discovered 5 standing stones. There's also a standing altar there, large enough for major sacrifices, and close by this altar there was a small tripart temple, again of a standard temple design for the Israelites, matching the temple I've just mentioned. And within this, the archaeologists have found a horned altar, shovels, the remains of animal sacrifice, and also found near there was an olive pressing facility to produce olive oil, which is used for priestly rites in Israelite religion, and a bronze works along with a bronze scepter. Everything here, like the other places, suggests that it was an Israelite site used for Israelite worship. And so this makes the following discovery at a place called Tel Dan even more important. And again, consider that according to the Bible, there was only one deity, a male deity, and you were not allowed to make any pictorial representation of him. So at Tel Dan, within the temple discovered there were 2 figurines found, a male and a female. But there is one more archaeological site worth looking up to help tie up any loose ends. And this is an ancient village site dated to the 10th century BCE, so slightly older than the other ones I've mentioned. And this place was called Tanaka. And within a building there, an olive press was found to make olive oil for priestly acts, and bones, and again, is used by priests in Israelite ceremonies. So this must have been an Israelite village. And within the archaeological site, something now known as the Tanakh cult stand was discovered. An artistic stand, probably for a bowl of incense, very decorative in a religion that's meant to have no representation of gods. And on the bottom of this is a goddess holding the ears of 2 lions, a lion goddess. And the name of the lion goddess? Asherah. But the most important find was a mould for making female figurines. Almost every household had a figurine back then, even in Jerusalem, and there would have been thousands of them, and many of these have been found. And the figurine is holding a round object. And although there is some contention over what it could be, my view, and that of some scholars, is that it's probably a cake. And the reason for this is that if you apply this discovery to a denunciation from the book of Ezekiel, which says, "Why is it so bad for children to gather sticks for kindling, and for men to make fires, and for women to bake cakes for the Queen of Heaven. This allows us, with a reasonable degree of confidence, to say that these figurines represent the Queen of Heaven holding a cake. And the Queen of Heaven is also known as Asherah. So we need to ask ourselves, why is Asherah here? She is a Canaanite goddess. Well, it's widely accepted that Israelite and Canaanite religions have parallels, due to them being neighbouring cultures wanting to occupy the same land, and with Asherah being the consort of El, the Canaanite god, it's thought that a lot of Israelites would consider Asherah as a consort to Yahweh. It should also be remembered that before Israel was a kingdom, there was no formal religion-wide control over how worship was conducted. The Old Testament of the Bible hadn't been written at this point in time when Asherah was being worshipped. And localised Israelite cults would have all had their own ways, their own sort of individual methods of worship, which would have also been influenced by those around them, such as the Canaanites. And this lack of mention of these cultist practices in the Bible shouldn't be a surprise. You know, the Bible only tells us what it wants us to know. It isn't an accurate historical representation of the Jewish people. And now we know this through our archaeological journey through some of the Israelite sites. We knew that many Israelites worshipped a goddess named Asherah, a name mentioned 40 times in the Bible. We know Israelites went astray in their worshipping gods, as it says that in the Bible. And then we add to this the female figures found across Israelite dwellings in the region of Judea and the rest of Israel, figurines we believe to be Asherah. And many have showed these goddess in a naked, generous position representing fertility, you know, something a mother goddess would do. And some of these figurines, if they weren't doing that, were showing her holding a cake, which we know was a gift from her followers. So considering everything, you know, these archaeological finds, the figurines, the multiple standing stones representing multiple gods, the stones that were of different heights, representing different sexes of gods, inscriptions found, the ones in the cave, the ones on the 2 jars, these all add weight to the argument in a belief of a goddess from the Canaanite region. Asherah had spilled into Judea and the Israelites, and into the belief of the children of Israel. The standing stones within the temple of Tel Adad almost certainly represent Yahweh and Asherah, part of a cult practice of Yahweh, and that included the use of a pole known as an Asherah, and a cult which also worshipped a female god called Asherah, Yahweh's consort, his wife, in effect, Mrs. God. So what happened to Mrs. God, or Asherah? Well, dating these archaeological finds, you know, they appear before the kingdom of Israel was formally created, and the heads of religion based in Jerusalem hadn't yet applied their law onto other people. But when they did, and it was a very male-dominated view, and they wrote the Old Testament, they imposed a stricter rule of worship. No longer were temples outside of Jerusalem allowed, gone were the other gods, like other than Yahweh. It was a stricter monotheistic view. You know, it was enforced. It removed the ability to worship Asherah as part of the localized cults. The areas where the temples were found were declared Canaanite or pagan, and then they were destroyed or abandoned. And it was this that changed the Israelite belief into the Judaism religion we know today. Gone were the beliefs that were a lot more complicated and diverse than the Bible would ever have you believe. Gone was Asherah. And so that is why there is no Mrs. God today. Well, not in the Abrahamic religions anyway. And so, once again, we have a story about religions that change, and change rapidly at times, removing gods, temples and beliefs, all in a way where those who follow the religion today are probably completely unaware. And for those interested in understanding the history of the Abrahamic religions further, then we have an interview coming up later on in November with Dr. Richard Carrier, which is an amazing opportunity for this channel. So please like and subscribe if you don't want to miss that. So I hope you enjoyed that journey through the early Israelite religion, you know, and understanding that actually it was a polytheistic religion. And so, until the next video, please stay safe, stay well, and this was Krakenford.